Carl Jung uncovered something deeply disturbing about how narcissists are formed. It's not about parents who hit. It's not about parents who yell. It's about something far more subtle, far more invisible, and far more destructive. It's about parents who, without even realizing it, murder the child's natural empathy, and they do it with a single, repeated response. "You're too soft." Let me show you exactly when this happens. It's the moment a 4-year-old sees another child crying on the playground. Their natural instinct, that innate ability to feel the pain of another, compels them to approach. She offers her favorite toy. She tries to console. She feels the pain as if it were her own. This is empathy in its purest, most natural, and most human state. And then her mom appears and says these exact words. "Stop being silly. He's probably faking it. You're too sensitive. Come here now. Stop worrying about others and take care of yourself." In that moment, something dies inside that child. Empathy doesn't disappear immediately. It's wounded. And every time the child tries again to feel for others, every time she shows concern, every time she connects with another's pain, she hears some variation of the same message. "You're weak. You're being foolish. You're too sensitive. You need to toughen up." And little by little, the child learns. She learns that empathy is dangerous, that feeling for others is weakness, that connecting emotionally is being a fool. And she stops feeling, not because she wants to, but because she's been trained, conditioned, programmed to believe that her most human, most beautiful, most essential capacity is actually her greatest flaw. Jung called this the amputation of the feeling function. It's not that the child loses the ability to feel, it's that she learns to shut down, to repress, to bury it so deep that eventually she doesn't even remember she once felt for others. And in place of empathy, something cold grows, something calculated, something narcissistic. I'm going to tell you the story of Ethan. Ethan was 5 years old when it all began. He was an extraordinarily empathetic child. When he saw someone sad, he would stop everything he was doing to help. He shared everything. He cared deeply about the feelings of others. He was, in Jung's words, a child with a highly developed feeling function. And then came the day his little brother fell and scraped his knee. The little brother was crying desperately. Ethan ran to help. He hugged his brother. He tried to clean the blood. He cried along with him, feeling the pain as if it were his own. That's true empathy. That's deep human connection. Ethan's dad saw the scene, and instead of seeing beauty in that capacity to feel for others, he saw weakness. He pulled Ethan away sharply and said these words that would mark Ethan forever. "Big boys don't cry. You're acting like a girly. Your brother is fine. Stop making a scene. You're being ridiculous." Ethan stopped crying immediately, but not because he stopped feeling. He stopped because he learned that feeling was wrong. And in that moment began a process that Jung described as the creation of the cold persona, the mask that hides humanity. But Ethan's story doesn't end there, because this was just the first incident. What creates the narcissist isn't an isolated event. It's the systematic repetition, the constant invalidation, the recurring punishment of every attempt by the child to demonstrate empathy. 2 weeks later, Ethan saw his school friend being excluded by other children. The friend was visibly hurt, isolated, alone. Ethan approached to include the friend in the games. And when he got home and told his mom this, hoping perhaps for recognition, validation, she said, "You don't need to worry about everyone. That kid probably did something to deserve it. You need to stop being so involved in other people's problems." Once again, the message was clear. Your empathy is a problem. Your ability to feel for others is something that needs to be corrected. You're wrong to care. And Ethan, like any child, wanted to please his parents, wanted to be seen as strong, as good, as right. So he began to repress, began to ignore that natural impulse to connect with another's pain, began to build walls around his heart. Jung would explain this as the repression of the empathetic shadow. The child can't simply eliminate empathy. It's part of the human psychic structure. So what happens? Empathy is pushed into the shadow, into the unconscious, into a place where it exists but cannot be accessed. And in its place, in consciousness, grows the persona of the narcissist, someone who not only doesn't feel for others, but who sees concern for others as weakness, as foolishness, as something to be despised. At 7 years old, Ethan was already completely transformed. When he saw someone suffering, he felt nothing, or rather, he felt something deeply buried that he learned to ignore so well that it seemed not to exist. And his parents? They were proud. They said, finally he's become a man. Finally he's stopped being so sensitive. Finally he's toughened up. But what they called toughening up, Jung would call fragmentation of the self. Ethan's true self, that naturally empathetic child, was buried, and in his place emerged a false self, a persona, a mask of coldness that Ethan would spend the rest of his life confusing with his true identity. And there's one more layer to this that most people don't realize. Because it's not just that Ethan stopped feeling for others, it's that he developed active contempt for any demonstration of empathy. When he saw other people being empathetic, he ridiculed them. When he saw someone worrying about others, he thought, how weak, how foolish, how pathetic. Jung would call this shadow projection. Ethan couldn't tolerate seeing in others what he was forced to kill in himself. So he attacked, he despised. He destroyed any vestige of empathy around him because it was unbearable to confront what he lost. At 15 years old, Ethan was what society calls a narcissist. He didn't care about anyone. He used people as objects for his own ends. He didn't feel remorse. He didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel connection. And if you asked him about empathy, he would say exactly the words that his dad said. Empathy is for the weak. Successful people don't waste time worrying about the feelings of others, but Jung knew the truth. Ethan wasn't naturally cold. He was trained to be cold. He wasn't born a narcissist. He was raised a narcissist. Through systematic invalidation, constant punishment, the repeated attack on his most human capacity, the ability to feel for others. And here's the most tragic part. Ethan's parents thought they were helping. They truly believed they were preparing their son for the real world, for competition, for success. They thought empathy was a luxury, that worrying about others was a distraction, that being sensitive was a weakness to be eliminated. And that's exactly what makes this form of creating narcissists so insidious, because it's not done with malice. It's done with the genuine belief that they're protecting the child, making the child strong, preparing the child to win. But what are they really doing? They're assassinating the child's humanity. They're creating an adult who will have empty relationships, who will feel a chronic void, who will never experience true connection, because true connection requires exactly what was ripped away from them, the capacity to feel for others. Ethan is 32 years old today. He's successful in material terms. He has money, he has status, he has power, and he is deeply, insupportably, chronically empty, because you can have everything in the world, but without the capacity to truly connect with another human being, without the capacity to feel empathy, to share deep emotions, you are fundamentally alone. And there are moments, rare moments, where that 5-year-old empathetic child tries to emerge. Moments where Ethan sees someone suffering and feels something stir deep down inside. But immediately, the voices come. The voices of his father, his mother, now completely internalized. Voices saying, "You're too soft, stop being silly, you're being ridiculous." And Ethan pushes that feeling back into the shadow. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires integrating the shadow. For Ethan, this means recognizing, bringing back into consciousness that part of him that was repressed, that empathetic child that still exists, buried, waiting. But shadow integration isn't easy, especially when the shadow contains aspects that were violently rejected by his parents. Because to integrate means confronting the parental message. It means saying, they were wrong. Empathy isn't weakness. Feeling for others isn't silly. Connecting emotionally isn't ridiculous. And that confrontation with the parental complex is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Because it means acknowledging that those who should have protected your humanity were exactly the ones who destroyed it. Let me show you another case. A girl named Madison. She was 6 years old when she brought home a stray kitten that was hurt. She found it in the street, saw that it was hungry and in pain, and her heart simply opened. She wanted to care for it, wanted to help it, wanted to alleviate the suffering of that little being. Her mother looked at the kitten and then at Madison with an expression of disgust and said, "You can't keep getting involved with every stray animal. It must be full of diseases. That's disgusting. You're going to throw it back into the street right now and stop crying. You're being dramatic." Madison tried to argue, tried to explain that the kitten was suffering, but her mother was clear. "I don't want to hear about it. You're being ridiculous. Throw it out." End of discussion. In that moment, Madison learned something devastating. She learned that her feelings of compassion were inconvenient, that her capacity to perceive suffering and want to alleviate it was a problem, that caring for another living being was something to be ashamed of. And just like Ethan, Madison started to repress, started to shut down that part of her that felt for others. And at 28 years old, Madison is a cold, calculating person, incapable of connecting deeply with any living being. She uses people. She discards relationships. She feels no remorse. And if you asked her why, she wouldn't know how to explain it. Because all of this happened on a pre-verbal, pre-rational level. In the deep place where the psyche forms, Jung would say that Madison developed what he called a cold anima, the feminine part of the psyche that should be warm, nurturing, empathetic, was frozen, turned to stone. And in its place grew a hard, impenetrable, narcissistic persona. And if you look closely, you'll see that both Ethan and Madison have something in common. Both were extraordinarily empathetic children. Both had a natural, innate, deep capacity to feel for others. And both had that capacity systematically attacked, ridiculed, punished, until they learned to repress it completely. This is crucial to understand. Narcissists aren't born narcissists. They're born with the same capacity for empathy as any other child, but they're trained to shut that capacity down. They're conditioned to see empathy as weakness. They're punished for demonstrating concern for others, and the parents who do this rarely realize what they're doing. They often come from families where empathy was also repressed, where demonstrating concern for others was also seen as weakness. It's a generational cycle, a family complex that passes from generation to generation. Ethan's father learned from his own father that men don't feel, don't care, don't demonstrate empathy. And without questioning, without awareness, he passed the same message on to Ethan. Madison's mother learned from her own mother that caring for others is inconvenient, is a burden, is something to regret. And automatically, unconsciously, she transmitted that to Madison. Jung called this unconscious psychic inheritance It's not genetic, it's learned, but it's so deep, so automatic, so invisible, that it seems to be part of the person's nature. And here's something that most people don't realize. The creation of a narcissist doesn't require obvious abuse. It doesn't require physical violence. It doesn't require extreme neglect. It can happen in families that seem completely normal, in families where the parents love their children, provide everything materially, never raise their voices, but where there's a constant, subtle, repeated invalidation of the child's natural empathy, a look of disapproval when the child demonstrates concern for others, a casual comment about not being so sensitive, an implicit message that caring is weakness. And if this has touched something in you, if you've recognized patterns from your own childhood, if you've seen at some point your own capacity to feel for others being systematically attacked, the super thanks down below isn't just support for the channel. It's you saying this deep psychological truth, this understanding about how narcissism forms, needs to be known, because every person who understands this mechanism is a person who can interrupt the cycle, who can raise children without destroying their humanity, who can preserve empathy instead of assassinating it. When you click that gold heart, you're becoming part of a bigger mission, the mission to bring to light the unconscious patterns that destroy the most fundamental human capacity, the ability to feel with and for others. And that's no easy task. It demands courage. It demands a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It demands recognizing that maybe your own parents did this to you, or that maybe you're doing this to your kids. But it's exactly that awareness, that willingness to look into the family shadow that makes healing possible, that makes integration possible, that makes it possible to recover what was lost. Ethan, at 32, finally sought therapy, not because he wanted to connect with others, but because the emptiness was becoming unbearable. And in one of the first sessions, the therapist, who had a Jungian background, asked a simple question: when was the last time you cried for someone other than yourself? Ethan couldn't remember. And then the therapist asked another question: when was the first time you learned that crying for others was wrong? And suddenly, the memory flooded back. 5-year-old Ethan, hugging his injured little brother, crying alongside him, being forcibly pulled away and humiliated by his father. You're acting like a girlie. Big boys don't cry. And for the first time in 27 years, Ethan felt something, a profound pain, an ancient rage, a sadness for everything that was lost. And he cried, not for achievements, not for status, not for material success, but for the empathetic child he was, who was assassinated to create the narcissistic mask he became. This is the first step of integration, recognizing the loss, feeling the pain of what was taken away, lamenting the child that could have been, and then, little by little, through much work, much suffering, much courage, beginning to bring back what was repressed, Ethan learned to feel again, not overnight, not easily calm, but gradually. He learned not to ridicule when he saw someone demonstrating empathy. He learned not to attack when he saw genuine concern for others. He learned very slowly to recognize that impulse within himself, that subtle movement toward connection with another, and instead of immediately repressing it, to allow it to exist. And you know what happened? For the first time in decades, Ethan started to feel alive. No more that chronic emptiness, no more that feeling of being fundamentally disconnected, but a growing sense of belonging, of connection, of shared humanity. Carl Jung would say that Ethan was beginning individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the fragmented parts, of bringing the empathetic shadow back into consciousness and allowing it to coexist with the persona that was created to protect him, And the most interesting thing, Ethan's relationship started to change. Not because he was trying to manipulate better, but because for the first time, he was genuinely present. He could listen without calculating how to use the information. He could see suffering without immediately dismissing it. He could, little by little, connect. Ashley also started therapy, for different reasons. She had just ended her 5th relationship in 6 years, and they all ended the same way. The person saying that she was cold, that she didn't care, that it was impossible to connect emotionally with her. And Ashley's therapist asked a similar question. Do you remember when you stopped caring about others? And Ashley immediately remembered the kitten. She remembered how her heart opened when she saw that little creature suffering, and remembered the shame she felt when her mother made her throw the kitten back into the street. The clear message, caring for others is disgusting, it's inconvenient, it's ridiculous. And Ashley cried. Not for the kitten, although it was for him too. But for the 6-year-old girl who learned that day that her compassion was something to be ashamed of, Ashley's recovery was long, because she wasn't just bringing back empathy. She was confronting decades of conditioning, decades of the internalized mother's voice saying, "You're being dramatic, you're being ridiculous, stop getting involved with everyone's problems." But she persisted, and little by little, that part of her that was frozen began to melt. And you know what was the sign that something was changing? Ashley adopted a dog, and when the dog got sick, instead of simply taking him to the vet as a task to be completed, she felt genuine worry. She felt fear of losing him. She felt connection. And that wasn't weakness, that was humanity returning. Let me show you some more ways that parents destroy empathy without realizing it, because it's not always as direct as saying, "You're too soft." Sometimes it's much more subtle, much more invisible. There's invalidation by comparison. An 8-year-old boy sees a classmate being bullied and is genuinely upset by it. He comes home and tells his mom, hoping maybe she'll help him understand his feelings, that she'll validate his concern. And the mom says, "Back in my day, it was much worse. Kids today are too sensitive. He'll get over it." What the child hears isn't about the classmate. It's about himself. He hears, "Your feelings aren't valid. What you feel isn't important. You're exaggerating." And there's invalidation by distraction. A 7-year-old girl sees an injured dog in the street and wants to help. She begs her parents to stop the car, and the parents say, "Look over there, an ice cream truck. Do you want ice cream? Let's forget about the dog and get some ice cream." It seems harmless. It even seems kind. But the message is clear. Your impulse to help, your concern for the suffering of others, is something to be distracted from, diverted, forgotten. And in place of empathy, individual pleasure is offered: ice cream, something just for you. Forget the rest. And there's perhaps the most devastating form of all, invalidation by ridicule disguised as joking. A 9-year-old boy cries while watching a movie where a dog dies, and the father laughs and says, "Look at you crying over a fake dog. You're so funny. Wait till I tell your friends." Public humiliation. The fear of being ridiculed. The child learns that expressing empathy is not only not validated, but is a cause for shame. And shame is one of the most powerful emotions to shape behavior. A child will do anything to avoid feeling shame again. Carl Jung would say that these experiences create what he called a shame complex linked to the feeling function. Every time the child feels an empathetic impulse, shame immediately comes along with it. And little by little, the impulse simply stops coming, or rather it's repressed so quickly, so automatically, that it seems like it never existed at all. Let me tell you about another case. A boy named Ethan. Ethan was 10 years old, and his favorite teacher got sick. He was genuinely concerned. He made her a drawing. He wrote a little note saying he hoped she'd get better soon. He took it home to show his mom before giving it to his teacher. His mom looked at the drawing and said, "Don't you have anything better to do? This won't make any difference. She won't even remember who you are. Stop wasting time with this silly stuff and go study." Ethan never gave the drawing to his teacher, and more than that, he learned something fundamental. Caring about others is a waste of time. It's silly. It's something that distracts you from really important things, like studying, succeeding, standing out. And here's the connection with narcissism, because narcissism isn't just a lack of empathy. It's the replacement of empathy with an exclusive focus on oneself, on one's own success, on one's own image, on one's own power. And this replacement often starts with parental messages exactly like that. Stop worrying about others and take care of yourself. Ethan at 25 is what they call a successful narcissist. He's ambitious, he's focused. He'll step on anyone to get what he wants. And if you ask him about empathy, he'll say exactly the words his mother said. That's a waste of time. Successful people don't worry about the feelings of others. But Carl Jung knew that this persona of success at any cost is a defense. It's an armor built on a wound. The wound of the 10-year-old whose genuine impulse to care was ridiculed, invalidated, destroyed. And there's another mechanism that needs to be understood. It's what Jung would call imitation of the parental complex, because children don't just learn from what their parents say, they learn from what their parents do. They observe, they internalize, they imitate. If a child grows up seeing their mother be completely indifferent to the suffering of others, they learn that this is normal. If they see their father ridicule people who demonstrate empathy, they learn that empathy is something to be despised. If they see their parents using people as objects, they learn that this is how relationships work. There's a girl named Ashley. She was 12 years old when she noticed something disturbing. She was watching her mom talk on the phone with a friend who was clearly in crisis, crying, desperate. And her mom, with an expression of total boredom on her face, was making sounds of sympathy. But as soon as she hung up the phone, she said to Ashley, "She's so dramatic, always with the problem, so exhausting." And Ashley saw something in that moment. She saw that her mother was capable of faking empathy perfectly, making all the right sounds, saying all the right words. But inside, there was total contempt, there was coldness, there was use. The friend was useful for certain purposes, so her mom maintained the relationship, but there was no genuine connection. There was no real concern. And Ashley, without realizing it, internalized this pattern. She learned that empathy is something you perform, not something you feel, something you use to manipulate, not to connect. And at 20 years old, Ashley is what Jung would call a covert narcissist. She seems empathetic. She knows exactly what to say, but inside, there's emptiness, there's coldness, there's calculation. And the most tragic thing, Ashley doesn't even know that there's something wrong. Because for her, this is normal. This is how relationships work. You pretend to care to get what you want. You imitate empathy to be seen as a good person, but to genuinely feel, to truly connect. That was never part of the equation. Carl Jung would say that Ashley developed an empathetic persona without substance, the perfect mask. And behind the mask, a fragmented self that never developed the real ability to feel with and for others. Now I'm going to give you a healing protocol, because if you recognized your own story in any of these cases, if you realize that your capacity for empathy was systematically destroyed, there is hope. There is the possibility of recovery, but it's not easy and it's not fast. First step, Acknowledge the wound, not intellectually, somatically. This means feeling it in your body. It means going back to those moments in childhood where your empathy was attacked and allowing the pain to emerge, allowing the anger to emerge, allowing the sadness for everything that was lost to be felt completely. Ethan did this in therapy. He went back to that moment at 5 years old, hugging his injured brother, being ripped away by his father, and instead of repressing the emotion as he did for 27 years, he allowed it to come. The pain, the shame, the confusion of that child who didn't understand why caring was wrong. Second step, question the parental messages. Don't just accept that empathy is weakness because your parents said so, but question it actively. Is it true that caring about others is silly? Is it true that feeling for others is a waste of time? Is it true that emotional connection is ridiculous? And when you question honestly, the answer is no, none of that is true. They are distorted messages transmitted by parents who were also wounded, who also had their empathy destroyed, and automatically passed on the same pattern. Third step, allow small experiences of empathy, not big gestures, small moments. Ethan started with something simple. When he saw someone trip on the street, instead of immediately ridiculing them as his automatic pattern dictated, he allowed a microsecond of concern, just that. Are you okay? And over months, those microseconds were increasing. They turned into seconds. They turned into minutes. They turned into the ability to be present with the pain of another person, without immediately needing to destroy, ridicule, or walk away. Fourth step, find healthy role models. Carl Jung said that parental complexes can be confronted through exposure to healthier archetypes. This means finding people, maybe therapists, maybe mentors, maybe friends, who demonstrate genuine empathy without shame, and allowing that new possibility to be internalized. Sophia did this. She found a support group where people spoke openly about their emotions, where demonstrating concern for others was not only accepted, but was celebrated. And for the first time in her life, she saw that it was possible to be empathetic and strong. That caring isn't weakness. Fifth step, break the generational cycle. If you have children, actively observe your own reactions. When your child demonstrates empathy, do you validate or invalidate them? And if you notice that you are automatically invalidating, pause, breathe, and choose differently. Because your child doesn't need to carry your wounds. Your child doesn't need to have their empathy destroyed. Because yours was. You can break the pattern, here, right now, in this generation. And that takes tremendous courage. It demands facing your own shadow. It requires admitting that maybe, just maybe, your parents were wrong. It means accepting that you were wounded in ways they might never acknowledge. And it means choosing, despite all of that, to do things differently. As Carl Jung would say, this is the work of individuation. It's not just discovering who you are, but discovering who you can choose to be, despite the programming, despite the wounds, despite the history. Ethan today at 35, 3 years after starting therapy, is a different person. Not because he fakes empathy, but because he reclaimed something that was stolen from him. He feels again, not naively, not like that 5-year-old kid, but in a mature, conscious, chosen way. He still hears his father's voices sometimes. You're too soft. Stop being silly. But now he recognizes that they are just voices, not truths. And he chooses, actively, not to obey them. Sarah, at 32, 4 years after beginning her journey, is in a healthy relationship for the first time in her life, and when her partner is in pain, she doesn't run, she doesn't ridicule, she doesn't distract herself. She stays present. She feels with him. And that, she says, is the most human, most beautiful, most profound experience she's ever had. David is still at the beginning of the journey. He just recognized that something is wrong, that emptiness isn't success, that power isn't connection, that having everything and not being able to share it with anyone is a prison. He started therapy and is, at 27, finally confronting that 10-year-old boy whose drawing was never given, whose impulse to care was called nonsense. And Ashley hasn't started yet. She's still in the illusion that everything is fine, that her performance of empathy is enough, that relationships are games to be won, not connections to be lived. But maybe one day, when the emptiness becomes unbearable, when the coldness becomes a prison instead of protection, she too will seek help. She too will confront the wound. She too will begin the journey back to her humanity. The truth that Carl Jung tried to teach us is that we are all wounded. We are all fragmented. We are all carrying shadows that we didn't choose, but we have the capacity, through tremendous courage and deep work, to become whole again, to integrate what was separated, to reclaim what was lost, and empathy, that fundamental ability to feel with and for others, is not dead. It's repressed. It's hidden. It's waiting, in the shadow, to be recognized, validated, brought back into the light. Now, if you're listening to this and recognizing patterns in your own life, maybe it's time to ask the difficult questions. When did you stop feeling for others? What message did you receive about empathy? Who taught you that caring was weakness? And if you have children, maybe it's time to observe your own reactions. When your child demonstrates concern for others, do you validate or invalidate? When your child cries for someone else's pain, do you embrace or ridicule? When your child wants to help someone in suffering, do you encourage or discourage? Because each of those little interactions is shaping that child's psyche. It's determining whether they will become an adult capable of deep connection or a narcissistic, empty, fundamentally alone adult. And now, I want to hear from you. What was the moment in your childhood when you learned that empathy was dangerous? Leave it in the comments below, because when you share your story, you help other people recognize theirs. And that recognition is the first step to healing.